Welcome to Florence, Italy, in the year 1502. The air smells of roasting chestnuts, fresh pine, wet plaster, and the unmistakable, slightly metallic aroma of the bubonic plague. This is the High Renaissance, a glorious era of human achievement where humanity looked at the dark, messy Middle Ages and said, "Hey, what if we cleaned this up with some math?" Artists are suddenly treated like rock stars, and the hottest trend in town is linear perspective. Everyone is obsessed with geometric perfection. If you can draw a straight line that vanishes into a single point on the horizon, you are basically a god. If you cannot, well, you might as well go back to shoveling pig manure. And that brings us to our hero, Pippo. Pippo wants to be a legendary artist more than anything. He has the passion of Michelangelo, the curiosity of Da Vinci, and the hand-eye coordination of a heavily caffeinated squirrel on a unicycle. Pippo has a problem. A very specific, very tragic problem. Pippo cannot, under any circumstances, draw a straight line. Watch him try. He sits at his wooden easel, sweat dripping from his forehead, muscles tensing. He places his charcoal stick on the paper. He aims for a simple, straight horizontal line. He breathes out. He pulls his hand back. And, bam! His arm violently spasms, executing 3 perfect loops, a graceful corkscrew, and a circle that looks like a freshly baked pizza. It is a masterpiece of curves, but as a straight line, it is an absolute disaster. To understand why this is a life-threatening issue, we have to look at Pippo's backstory. Pippo was born into a family of ultra-traditional Florentine stonemasons. His father's idea of a bedtime story was reading Euclid's Elements of Geometry aloud. While other babies played with wooden rattles, Pippo was given a T-square and a plumb line. His father wanted him to build straight, sturdy walls for the Medici family. But early on, it became clear Pippo was different. When asked to carve a straight block of marble, Pippo would accidentally chisel a hyper-realistic, swirling wave. His father tried everything. He tied Pippo's hand to a wooden plank. He made him pray to St. Luke, the patron saint of artists. He even made him eat straight spaghetti, uncooked, hoping the rigidity would transfer to his bones. Nothing worked. Determined to fix his crooked son, Pippo's father paid a small fortune in silver florins to apprentice him to Master Alesso, the most feared art instructor in Florence. Master Alesso's studio was a place of pure geometric terror. Alesso believed that straight lines were the literal handwriting of God, and curves were the playground of the devil. Every morning, Alesso would line up his apprentices and make them draw a single, continuous, 5-foot-long straight line on a whitewashed wall. If an apprentice's hand wobbled even a millimeter, Alesso would swoop in like an angry, bald eagle and whack their knuckles with a heavy pearwood ruler. Poor Pippo's knuckles were permanently bruised. He spent 3 years trying to master the perfect line, but the harder he tried, the more his hand rebelled. While his classmates painted rigid, orderly Roman arches, Pippo's paintings looked like a hurricane had hit a noodle factory. He survived only by doing the tasks nobody else wanted, like grinding lapis lazuli into blue powder and washing Alesso's muddy boots. But a crisis was brewing, and it was about to land right on Pippo's wobbly shoulders. Enter Duke Ludovico the Stern. Ludovico was a man of immense wealth, questionable hygiene, and an absolute obsession with symmetry. He had just built a massive new reception hall in his palace and wanted a fresco that would make his rivals spit up their wine in envy. The subject? A grand, highly complex scene of the Roman Forum, featuring 52 marble columns stretching back into perfect, mathematically precise linear perspective. The Duke summoned Master Alesso to commission the piece. However, on the very day of the meeting, Master Alesso slipped on a wet piece of discarded melon rind outside the guild hall, breaking both of his wrists. With the master out of commission and the Duke threatening to revoke the guild's painting license if the work didn't start immediately, the desperate guild had to choose a substitute. Through a series of catastrophic clerical errors and a healthy dose of cowardice from the senior apprentices, Pippo was chosen. When Pippo heard the news, his stomach did a double flip that mirrored his drawings. He was being asked to paint the most line-heavy, perspective-dependent fresco in Florentine history. If he succeeded, he would be a master. If he failed, Duke Ludovico would have him thrown into the deepest, dampest dungeon in the Bargello, where the only thing straight would be the iron bars. On Monday morning, Pippo stood on the wooden scaffolding inside the Duke's palace, staring at a giant, blank, wet plaster wall. He had precisely 4 days to complete the fresco before the plaster dried. He knew he couldn't do it alone, so he began his desperate, chaotic attempts to solve his straight-line curse. For his first attempt, Pippo decided to use technology. He constructed a monstrously large wooden ruler, 12 feet long, suspended by ropes from the ceiling. He placed his brush against the wooden guide, took a deep breath, and began to drag it across the wall. It was working, a straight line. But Pippo's hand, sensing the unnatural straightness, began to twitch violently. The twitch turned into a full-body spasm. He slipped, his foot caught in the suspension rope, and the giant wooden ruler swung wilding across the room like a medieval demolition ball. It smashed into a scaffold support, sending 3 buckets of wet, gray plaster flying through the air. At that exact moment, Duke Ludovico walked in to check on the progress. The Duke was hit squarely in the face by a massive glob of plaster, making him look like a very angry, aristocratic snowman. Pippo apologized profusely, claiming it was an ancient Roman technique for priming the room's atmosphere. The Duke was not amused. He gave Pippo 48 hours to finish, or else. Panic set in. For his second attempt, Pippo turned to chemistry. He visited a local apothecary, a shady man who lived in an alley smelling of sulfur and wet cat. The apothecary sold Pippo a small blue vial labeled the elixir of rigidity. The apothecary claimed it was made from crushed iron filings, distilled vinegar, and the sweat of a Swiss guard. 1 sip, the man whispered, and your arm will be as stiff as a marble column. Pippo, desperate, drank the entire bottle. It tasted like rusty nails and battery acid. Immediately, his arm went completely numb. It was rigid, all right. He couldn't bend his elbow. He climbed the scaffold, holding his brush like a spear, and tried to paint. But because his arm was completely locked, he couldn't control the pressure. He pressed too hard, snapping his expensive sable brushes one by one. When he tried to move, his rigid arm caused him to lose balance, and he fell backward off the scaffold, landing directly into a giant basket of goose feathers. He emerged looking like a mutated chicken, covered in yellow glue and white down. Time was running out. Only 24 hours remained. Pippo tried his third and most desperate plan, outsourcing. He snuck into the poorest quarter of Florence and hired a street urchin named Johnny, who claimed he could draw perfect straight lines in exchange for a half-eaten wheel of pecorino cheese. The plan was simple. Johnny would draw the straight architectural lines in charcoal, and Pippo would just color them in. It was foolproof, except for one minor detail. Johnny was completely illiterate and had no idea what a Roman column looked like. Instead of drawing majestic classical architecture, Johnny drew a series of incredibly straight, highly detailed wooden fences, a few stick figures, and a giant, straight-line drawing of a turnip. When Pippo saw the turnip on the palace wall, he wept. He sent Johnny away, sat on the dusty floor, and accepted his fate. He was going to prison. It was the final night. The plaster was drying fast. The Duke's grand banquet was scheduled for the next morning. Pippo, exhausted, sleep-deprived, and slightly delirious from the apothecary's potion, looked at the ruin of the wall. There were random charcoal marks, plaster splatters, and a giant turnip. In a moment of pure, artistic madness, Pippo snapped. "If I am going to prison," he shouted to the empty room, "I am going to prison for being myself." He grabbed 2 giant brushes, dipped them in his deepest ultramarine blue and fiery vermilion red, and climbed the scaffold. He abandoned all rulers, all grids, and all perspective. He let his hand do what it had always wanted to do. He spun, he twirled, he leaped across the wooden planks. His hand whipped across the wet plaster in a frenzy of absolute, uninhibited curves. He drew massive, swirling vortexes of wind. He painted clouds that looked like cosmic whirlpools. The Roman columns became spiraling, organic towers of marble that seemed to dance and breathe. The figures of the Roman senators weren't stiff and frozen. They were swept up in a tempest of dynamic, circular energy, their robes billowing in magnificent, looping folds. Pippo painted all night, guided only by the flickering light of 3 candles and pure, unadulterated panic. He didn't draw a single straight line. The entire wall was a symphony of circles, waves, and spirals. As the sun rose over Florence, Pippo collapsed on the floor, covered in paint, awaiting his doom. At 8 o'clock sharp, the heavy oak doors of the hall creaked open. Duke Ludovico walked in, flanked by 3 armed guards and a distinguished guest, none other than a wealthy cardinal from Rome, who was the most influential art critic in all of Italy. There was a long, agonizing silence. The Duke stared at the wall. His mouth fell open. His rough collar trembled. He looked at the swirling, chaotic, straight-line-free masterpiece. He raised his hand, pointing a trembling finger. What is this?" the Duke whispered, his voice shaking with what Pippo assumed was homicidal rage. Pippo closed his eyes, preparing to be dragged away. But before the Duke could order his arrest, the Roman cardinal stepped forward. The cardinal fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "My God!" the cardinal gasped, clutching his chest. It is divine. Look at the movement. Look at the emotion. For years, we have been trapped in the prison of cold, dead, straight lines. We have made art a slave to mathematics. But this artist has captured the literal breath of the Holy Spirit. The cosmos is not straight, Duke Ludovico. The heavens spin. The stars rotate. This is not just a painting. It is a theological revolution. The Duke, not wanting to look intellectually inferior to a Roman cardinal, quickly changed his expression from horror to smug satisfaction. "Yes, exactly," the Duke declared, puffing out his chest. "I commissioned this specifically. I told young Pippo here. Pippo, give me the music of the spheres. No straight lines, for straight lines are the work of boring minds." Pippo opened his eyes, utterly dumbfounded. By noon, news of Pippo's masterpiece had spread across Florence like wildfire. Artists from all over Tuscany rushed to the palace to see the new style. They called it Il Movimento Cavo, the curved movement. Critics hailed Pippo as a visionary genius who had single-handedly broken the tyranny of linear perspective. Master Alesso, his hands still in casts, hobbled into the hall, looked at the painting, and declared that he had always known Pippo was his most brilliant pupil. Pippo was suddenly the most sought-after artist in Italy. King Francis I of France sent a letter offering him a fortune to come paint wavy ceilings in Paris. The Medici family commissioned him to design a cathedral with curved walls. Pippo was wealthy, famous, and celebrated for the very flaw that had almost ruined his life. To celebrate his newfound success, the Guild of St. Luke threw a massive banquet in Pippo's honor. At the end of the night, the wine-drunk artists gathered around him, placing a fresh sheet of parchment on the table. "Show us, Master Pippo," they cheered. "Draw us one of your divine, heavenly circles. Teach us the secret of the curve." Pippo smiled, picked up a charcoal stick, and relaxed his hand. He didn't feel any panic. He didn't feel any stress. For the first time in his life, he was completely at peace. He placed the charcoal on the paper, intending to draw his signature, beautiful, looping spiral. His hand moved, and zip! He drew a perfectly straight, mathematically flawless, 5-inch horizontal line. Pippo stared at the line. The crowd gasped in horror. "A straight line?" one artist whispered in disgust. "How boring. How derivative. How medieval." Pippo laughed nervously, quickly trying to paint over it. It turned out, once you lose your anxiety, you lose your twitch. And in the fickle world of art, sometimes your greatest flaw is the only thing keeping you famous. So, if you ever feel like you don't fit into the straight and narrow lines of the world, just remember Pippo. Sometimes, a crooked path is the only way to make history.